Hi everyone. So let's go ahead and move on down the respiratory tract to the lower respiratory tract. And this is going to be section 3 of chapter 23. If we remember what our lower respiratory tract, this is going to include not only conduction pathways, part of that conduction zone, but this is also, we're going to transition into that respiratory zone. So this is going to be from the larynx, going all the way down to the terminal bronchioles. Remember, terminal bronchioles is where the conducting zone is going to end. And then that's where we are going to start the respiratory zone with the respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. So again, lower respiratory tract infections affect some or all of these structures. And I kind of talked about that in the very first section. That's where you might have heard those lower and upper respiratory tracts. So let's start with my favorite organ of the respiratory system. It's the larynx. So the larynx, remember I mentioned this before, it's also called the voice box. It's going to be that cylindrical airway between the laryngopharynx and the trachea. So that's where we left off last time, was that pharynx and how air is going to pass from the pharynx, or the laryngopharynx specifically, into the larynx, and then from the larynx we'll talk about how it passes to the trachea if we're breathing in, right? So let's talk about all the many functions. We already know it's an air passageway, but we're also going to talk about how we have this structure that's going to make sure that ingested materials do not go into the respiratory tract and it goes into the digestive tract instead. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about speech and how that is going to be formed whenever these things called vocal cords vibrate. As we push air across them during expiration. Interestingly enough, you can produce a little bit of sound with inspiration, but it doesn't sound great. But anyway, it also assists in increasing pressure in the abdominal cavity. So if we can go in and close off the larynx, and at the same time with our ab muscles increase the pressure in the abdominal cavity, this is called the Valsalva maneuver, and that is going to be that whole process, this function right here. It also participates in sneezing and coughing. So sneezing is going to be, of course, this reflexive behavior that we have whenever we have an irritant in our upper respiratory tract, we're trying to get it out of the upper respiratory tract. Or the cough is going to be it's going to be that reflexive behavior from parts of the lower respiratory tract. And it's some kind of irritant that's going to be in that part of the respiratory tract that we're trying to get out. So what happens is usually we'll talk about how the vocal cords are going to be closed shut, and then they will spastically open as we push the air either through a sneeze or a cough. So we'll talk about sneezing and coughing reflex later on when we talk about the whole reflex process. So let's take a look at the anatomy. And again, we're not going to go through all the little structures here because there's a lot to this larynx. So it is my favorite, but man, there's a lot going on here in this larynx. 9 pieces of cartilage. That's a whole lot. We're going to look at these single pieces a little bit more than the paired smaller pieces of cartilage. So you have a single thyroid cartilage that's going to be here. That's going to be the bigger of the cartilages that you can actually feel. And if you take a look at it from the back, it's actually doesn't go all the way around now, does it? Kind of interesting there. So there's the thyroid cartilage in the back, and then that's going to be it in the front. The cricoid is going to be the one that's going to be more prominent in the back. So the cricoid you can feel, you can see it in the front. It's a little bit, but it's bigger in the back. And then the epiglottis is that weird tongue looking thing right here that's kind of sticking up over that hyoid bone. So all of these, so the thyroid cartilage, the cricoid cartilage are actually made of hyaline cartilage, so it gives it its nice strength that we need of a cartilage. But then this epiglottis is not, because we're going to talk about how this epiglottis, if this is my epiglottis, and this is going to be the rest of the larynx over here, like the thyroid cartilage. We're going to talk about how the epiglottis needs to do this. It needs to be able to fold over and close off that larynx whenever we are eating. So whenever we're swallowing, actually. And it needs to snap back whenever we need to breathe. So swallow. And this is what it looks like when we're breathing. It's going to be open, nice and open. So if you think about what kind of cartilage is going to be bendy like that, it's going to be your elastic cartilage. So that is going to be your epiglottis. Remember that you're going to have these paired cartilages. I think there's a better picture later on that we're going to be taking a look at. I hope so, of the paired ones. These aren't as obvious on the outside. Some of them we can see a lot better on the inside. You have the arytenoid, you have your corniculate, and your cuneiform cartilages. Really the only one we would talk about is this one because it is going to kind of be where these intrinsic ligaments are going to sit. So we'll take a look at that more than I don't even think we mentioned the other two at all. So we'll just talk about the arytenoid there. I want to keep saying arachnoid, but that's not the term that we are going to use. So let's take a look at some ligaments. We have external ligaments and internal ligaments. If I go back here, you can see some of the external ligaments. We're not going to talk about those. Is there another one? There's another one right here. No, it's membrane. So no, that should be, yeah, it says it's a membrane, but it should be a ligament. But anyway, but we're not going to talk about those. We're going to focus on these intrinsic ligaments because they are called vocal ligaments. And whenever you cover them with a mucosa, you are going to get your vocal folds, your vocal cords, I guess I should say. So that is going to be what we get here. So that's why I want to concentrate more on these different cartilages here, because as you can see, these vocal ligaments right here, the intrinsic ligaments, look, they attach to that thyroid cartilage, and they are going to go down to the that arytenoid cartilage right here. So interesting enough, remember that with this thyroid cartilage, we are going to have something called the laryngeal prominence right here. That is the Adam's apple. So males tend to have a larger Adam's apple, and it usually is going to come about right around puberty, and it's because of testosterone. So testosterone, remember, is going to go in and cause chondrocytes to proliferate and all other kinds of tissue growth. And since this is cartilage, lots of chondrocytes are going to start to grow. But look, this is why. Because of the fact that the vocal ligaments are going to be attached here at this thyroid cartilage and go all the way to that arytenoid cartilage, males, if this was a female and then I drew males, males tend to be a little bit more narrow and longer. So we'll talk about how this link, they are going to have longer vocal ligaments and vocal cords because of that kind of longer, larger thyroid cartilage that they are going to have. So that's kind of interesting, right? So with these vocal ligaments, I mentioned how they're going to be covered in mucosa, and that is when they form these vocal folds, specifically true vocal cords. They're going to appear whitish if you ever look at them like through a scope or anything like that. They'll appear whitish because they're avascular. They're this avascular connective tissue, elastic connective tissue. Because when sound, if we want to produce sound, like I'm having trouble right now producing sound, but air is going to pass between them, but it's going to cause them to vibrate. And so we want them to be nice and elastic to be able to vibrate like that. So those are going to be what your vocal cords are going to be made of. It's these vocal ligaments that's covered in a nice mucosa, and you can kind of see it right here. You have a space in between. I don't want to say potential, but sometimes there's not a space. If it's completely closed, that we'll take a look at here in a second. But this space that you have is called a rima glottis, and together the vocal folds and the rima glottis is going to form this glottis. Now you have another set of ligaments, intrinsic ligaments, and they are called vestibular ligaments. And they're also covered with a mucosa, and they form something called the vestibular folds, which are false vocal cords. They play no role in sound production, and they're really there to kind of protect the vocal cords. You can kind of see them here. Let me show you, I'm going to show you a different view of what they look like, because they actually sit superior to the vocal folds, and this doesn't look like they are superior, so this kind of gives a little bit of a different view. But this is actually a really good picture of kind of that whitish appearance that the vocal folds, true vocal cords are going to take on. I tend to say vocal folds or vocal cords, so I try to stick with vocal cords, true or false, or anyway, I try to stick with one or the other. But usually when I do talk about vocal cords, they are going to be the true ones. If they're not, I say false vocal cords. Anyhow, but let's take a look at a different picture. I had to go in and sneak this in because I couldn't believe that the book did not have one of these pictures of what it looks like on the inside. So this is going in and looking at, if we go in and look at a sagittal view, look at how the vestibular folds, or the false vocal cords, are going to sit superior to those true vocal cords. So that's another view to it. I think it kind of adds a different perspective on it. Now let's take a look at these extrinsic, or these muscles. The extrinsic muscles we're not going to talk about. If you go back to that other picture, you'll see various muscles on the outside that are going to be like between the thyroid and the cricoid, and places like that. You have one between the thyroid and the hyoid. These are going to be there to stabilize the larynx, and they're also going to kind of move the larynx during swallowing as well. What we want to look at is mainly these intrinsic muscles. And they're intrinsic because they're going to be found on that interior portion, but the reason why we want to talk about it is that's what's going to go in and help cause this adduction and abduction of the vocal folds. So again, these are located within the larynx, and they are going to either open up that glottis or close the glottis. See, when they are adducted, remember what happens with adduction and abduction, that's going to happen. This is really important in voice production, like usually when you're whispering, your glottis is almost completely closed. But then whenever you raise your voice, and we'll talk about loudness as well, but usually when you raise your voice, it's going to be all the way open as well, as forcing more air past your vocal cords. So they function in sound production, and also swallowing. They're going to just go in and close to make sure that nothing gets down in that larynx where it's not supposed to be. So not only do you have that epiglottis that's going in and closing it, but you're also going to have that the glottis that's going to completely shut as well. So let's talk about sound production. Very interesting. This is going to be where the vocal cord, the true vocal cords, remember that's where sound production is going to come from, is going to vibrate. So again, you have those intrinsic muscles that are going in and narrowing the opening of the rima glottis, or opening them up. It really just depends on the type of sound that you're making. But air is going to be forced past the vocal cords during expiration. So next time that you talk, really just kind of pay attention to what's happening to the air, and pay attention to the length of your larynx and how it kind of moves up and down. If you put your hand here and you look for where your Adam's apple is, and you can kind of feel it moving up and down as you go up and down, and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are going to go into sound production, and some of them, like I just talked about, we're not going to get into, but let's talk about range. Range has to do with hey, that person has a deeper voice. You know, they are going to have more of a bass voice, or they're going to have more of a soprano voice. You know, if you think about your range of voice that you have, if you can sing really low and go all the way up high, that is going to be what your normal range is, just your speaking range, not, you know, how high or how low you can go. Your just normal speaking range is going to come from the length and thickness of your vocal cords. That's why males are going to have a deeper range. They are going to have deeper voices because of the fact that the vocal folds, remember, are going to grow in length because they're attached to the thyroid cartilage. And that's going to deepen their range. That's why children are going to have a little bit higher range because it's a little bit short. They're going to be shorter and not as thick. Women tend to have a little bit of a higher range as well. Again, it has to be because they don't have as big of an Adam's apple. And, or I guess I should say thyroid cartilage. And because of that, it's going to give them a bit of a higher range. Now, pitch can sometimes be used at the same time. It's going to be a little bit of the same idea as pitch, but pitch has more to do with how fast those vocal folds are actually vibrating, the frequency of their vibration. And that's determined by how taut or how much tension is on the vocal cords. So if you go in and increase the tension, they're going to be more taut, T-A-U-T. I should write that down, right? That's what I have my little pen for. I can't even spell. It's supposed to be a U, and it doesn't want me to write a U. There we go. But that's going to cause them to vibrate more because they're not all loosey-goosey anymore. They're going to be more tight, and they're going to vibrate a lot more. That gives a higher pitch. And then if you go in and loosen them, then that is going to go in and kind of give it a lower, not lower, you're decreasing the tension, so they're going to vibrate not as often, and that gives you a lower pitch. This is regulated. If you can kind of think about how I was saying, if you go in and kind of increase the tension this way to where they're not able to vibrate, they're kind of more stiff, it's because of those intrinsic muscles that are going to be right there. That's what's going in, kind of like your guitar string. You're going in and tightening it. Your muscles are going in and tightening and increasing the tension like that. Loudness has to do with how forceful the air is. So if you go in and scream, you're really pushing a lot of air over those vocal folds, so they are going to, and that's going to cause that louder sound. But if you whisper, you're barely going in and pushing any kind of any kind of air over. So again, really kind of pay attention to what's happening next time you talk with everything that's going on in the larynx, because this is where it comes from. Now, I've only been talking about sound, and that's phonation. Another term for that is phonation. But if we want to form any kind of speech, like what I'm doing right now, whenever we are talking, so speech is going to be a combination of phonation, hopefully I spelled that right, phonation, yeah, but also articulation. So all of this that we just talked about, all we were doing was just making noises, right? If we want to actually talk, we have to articulate and think about all of the things that are required to say the words that you say. It's your tongue that's pushing up against your teeth, or it's pushing up against your hard palate, and your lips are moving certain ways, and it's going to cause you to sound very different, right? All of the little ways that you move your mouth is going to come into play with the speech. And remember, you also have those paranasal sinuses that are going to give rise to resonance, and other cavities as well that are going to kind of help with the resonance. So there's a couple of videos after this. You don't have to watch them, but I highly recommend you watching them. One of them is, actually two of them have to do with scopes that are being put down, and the camera is going in and showing us what is going on with those vocal cords. So it's really interesting to see the movement of the larynx and just the movement and vibration, how they vibrate. So it's really interesting to see. So you should definitely watch that one. There's one with Steven Tyler. They, of course, hopefully you know that he's the lead singer of Aerosmith, but he also does the same thing. It's a little bit longer of a video, but it's really interesting as well. And then there's a one that you can kind of go through looking at vocalization. I think I'm trying to remember, it's called vocalization and sound. You can take a look at what the articulation looks like. There's a woman that went through, I guess, was talking with in an MRI, and you can kind of see all the little intricacies that are going on with her mouth. There's also in that one, make sure you watch Mishka, the talking dog, and watch Hoover, the seal, is my favorite as well. So very interesting videos that I added in. And as you can see, this is why the larynx is the best respiratory structure of them all, respiratory organ of them all. So let's take a look and see what happens when maybe you scream too much at a concert that you might have went to the other day, or a football game, or you caught a nasty bacterial infection or something like this. If the bacterial infection gets to the larynx, then that is going to cause inflammation. Also, overuse causes inflammation as well. And look at this. Whenever when they're inflamed, look how swollen they are. And this is that cool little scope that is in the video that I was talking to you about, how you can go in and scope with a camera and video it. But this is going in and capturing it with a camera. And this is showing how they are going to be inflamed. And if you look at these, they are not going to vibrate whatsoever. Remember, vibration is the key to producing sound. And if these aren't vibrating, that's what's going to lead to that hoarse voice. Also, you can have a sore throat and things like that. In severe cases, it can extend here to, here to the epiglottis. So I was thinking that this was it, but that is just this is showing an inflamed larynx in general, but not an inflamed epiglottis, which is part of the larynx. Anyway, interesting fact, this is what George Washington died of, was epiglottitis. So maybe that's not interesting to you, but I think it's interesting. So that can be an issue, especially in children, that can completely close off the airway. So let's leave my favorite organ and follow the air down to its next organ that it needs to pass through, which is the trachea, or the windpipe.